started. Good afternoon. Welcome to the next in the series of webinars on the Forest Legacy program. It's great to see so many people in attendance today. And as all of you know, the Forest Legacy program is such an important conservation tool in the toolbox that has protected so many great places across this country and hopefully many more to come. So thank you for joining today. We're looking forward to a great dialogue. I'm Leslie Kane. I chair the LWCF Coalition, and I'm thrilled that we're joined today by the Forest Legacy, Forest Service Forest Legacy team, including Claire Harper, Scott Stewart, Liz Petruska, Cassie Adams, and Andy Giardina. We're so fortunate for our partnership with the Forest Legacy team and thankful they're able to be here today with some really important updates since the last webinar we hosted in March. Those updates are particularly related to the Forest Legacy Inflation Reduction Act funding and will be the focus of our session today. And we're based on feedback from all of you from that first webinar, plus additional input that the Forest Legacy team received from partners through their outreach. And I just want to recognize them for their thorough work and collaboration and for being so accessible throughout this process. I know I speak for all of us in saying how appreciative we all are. So thanks again to all of you. And I know all of you as members of the LWCF Coalition and beyond are excited about having the opportunity through the IRA with the additional $700 million. We want to thank all of you for the work for making that happen. This significant investment, which I know you know is over and above the core Forest Legacy projects that are funded through the Land and Water Conservation Fund, would never have been possible without the leadership and hard work of the team at the Forest Service, all the states, the NGO partners, all of you who have collectively raised the program's level of excellence and have ensured so many successful achievements, protecting over now 3 million acres of land since the creation of the program in 1990. And of course, it's not news, but the other reason why Forest Legacy was included in the IRA is that it is such a great tool for climate resilience and carbon sequestration. So we're looking forward to hearing from the team about the goals and specifics of these dollars and the changes that have happened with the funding notice, and thought that this would be the perfect time for a check-in now that the regular FY25 budget applications are in and before the first deadline for IRA funding in December. We'll have plenty of time for questions after the presentation, and Caleb Abbott and Amy Lindholm, who work with me in the coalition, will be fielding those questions. And if you all could just put any questions in the Q&A, we will try to get to all of them. And again, just want to thank you all for being on this call and for making this program such a success. I am going to hand it over to Liz, who's going to walk us through some of these updates, and looking forward to a good session. So thanks again. Go ahead, Liz.
Great. Thanks so much, Leslie. I really appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Liz Petruska. I am a program specialist with the Forest Legacy program. And Andy, if you can get our slideshow started, that would be great. Just want to introduce the team that's here with us this afternoon. We've got Scott Stewart and Claire Harper, who are our Forest Legacy program managers. Cassie Adams, who's a program specialist, and then Andy Giardina, who's a natural resource specialist for us. I would love to have time to get to know all of you. It's wonderful that there's over 100 of you, but obviously we don't have time to do that. But what we would like to do today is just throw out a few poll questions so that we can help start to get an idea of who the community that is interested in this funding opportunity is. So Caleb, if you could put up our first poll question. Great. So just curious kind of who in our audience today has experience applying for federal funding. Give folks a second to respond. And I want to echo what Leslie said, just to thank you all for being here and thank you for your leadership and support, both for the Forest Legacy program and all of the wonderful funding opportunities that support the work we do, both the Great American Outdoors Act and these new Inflation Reduction Act funding opportunities. Really appreciate all that you all do as partners in this work. All right, looks like we've got a fair amount of experience with federal funding, which is really great. Our goal today is to share some information, as Leslie said, on some special Forest Legacy opportunities that were created by the Inflation Reduction Act funding. And if you could go to the next slide. But before we dive into specifics on that funding opportunity, I just wanted to provide a little background on the history and purpose of the Forest Legacy Program for those of you who may not be as familiar with it. So kind of at its core, Forest Legacy is about keeping forests as forests. Just over half of the nation's forest lands are privately owned, but these forests provide really important benefits for all of us by providing clean air and water, fish and wildlife habitat, public recreation opportunities, and economic benefits, right? You all know all this. But over time, these forests have been threatened by conversion. So in the late 1980s, Diamond International, a wood products company, announced a plan to sell over 1 million acres of forest land in Maine, New York, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And it was really an extraordinary occurrence, especially because these had really been de facto public lands. And so it really raised concerns about conversion to non-forest uses and the stability of ownership in this 26 million acre northern forest region. And so you had the governors of these 4 New England states that were really worried about how this sale and changing ownership were going to impact their forest dependent communities. And so in response, the Northern Forest Land Study was commissioned, and its purpose was to kind of take a look at that ownership and use of the Northern Forests and to find, to suggest proposals for preserving these big tracts of working forests. And so the Forest Legacy Program grew out of a recommendation in that Northern Forest Land Study. And then in 1990, Congress followed one of those recommendations and enacted the Forest Legacy Program through the 1990 Farm Bill. And as part of that kind of initial legislation, it authorized Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, and Washington to participate, and then other states could join upon completion of an assessment of need. In 1996, the Farm Bill was amended. It amended the authority to allow states and territories to receive grants from the program. Next slide, please. So this forest conservation program that started in just 5 states in the 1990s has expanded nationally and now includes 53 states and territories. As Leslie mentioned earlier, this year the program reached an incredible milestone of helping to conserve 3 million acres of forest land across the country. And you can see here on the map, we've got the areas in green are our Forest Legacy areas. Over the program's history, we've had 466 projects completed, and that comprises 1,089 tracts, over 3 million acres conserved. About 80% of the project's acres are conservation easements, and about 20% are fee simple purchases. $2.2 billion total investment have been made in these projects, with just over $1 billion coming from federal funds and just over $1 billion coming from partner contributions. So really an impressive amount of resources going to these projects. And I think, you know, the over 50% partner contributions really speaks to the strong role that you all play in making these projects happen. Over the program's history, we've really had an impressive suite of conservation values that have been protected. We have working forests, water quality and water protection, wildlife habitat and corridors, lots of recreation and access resources, properties with really significant scenic view sheds and cultural values, as well as projects that are contributing to climate resilience and carbon sequestration. Next slide, please. So funding for the program has primarily come from the Land and Water Conservation Fund. The first funding for the program came in 1992 and was about $5 million. And as you can see from the chart following that, the funding levels have really varied over the years. You can see in recent years kind of the impact of the Great American Outdoors Act. And again, just want to highlight the really important role that the NGO and land trust community played in advancing that permanent funding for the program. And so it's really exciting to think about what we can achieve now with these new funds from the Inflation Reduction Act as well. Next slide, please. So we're going to throw out another poll now to you all. Caleb can throw that up. Just looking to get a sense of who has partnered with a state agency on a land acquisition project. Give that 1 second. Thank you, everybody, for voting. Okay, so we've got about 80% of you, I think this is sharing. 80% of you have partnered with a state agency before on a land acquisition project. And the reason I ask is because we wanted to talk a little bit about partnerships in our program and the roles that land trusts play. And so Forest Legacy is a program that is really fundamentally built on partnership. So the way our authorizing legislation works, the funds do flow from the Forest Service to states and territories to implement the program, but absolutely no Forest Legacy project is done in a silo. So our program is successful because we've got patient, willing private landowners, and then land trusts and NGO partners who really bring incredible capacity and technical resources. And in fact, most Forest Legacy projects have a very strong NGO partner that are helping these projects move along. The program has grown significantly in recent years, so we've got a lot of new Forest Service staff, both in our Washington office and regions, as well as new Forest Legacy program coordinators in our states and territories as well. And so we definitely get that strength and capacity from working together, but to do it well, it's really important to kind of understand the roles of each partner. Next slide, please. So I won't touch on all of these here, but just wanted to give you kind of a snapshot of some of the partners and how they participate. So you've got the Forest Service, the Washington office, and our regional staff, a lot of who are also on our call here today with us, keeping an eye on the big policy issues, national program budget, managing our competitive selection, and awarding grants. As I said before, the funds flow from the Forest Service to our states and territories. So they're our main point of contact with Forest Service and partners. They're overseeing program administration. They need to be consulting with their state forest stewardship committees on project selection. They'll be managing a lot of grant paperwork as well, and then soliciting project proposals from landowners and partners. And then our NGOs and land trusts, as I mentioned earlier, are not recipients of our funds and are not actually eligible to hold lands that are acquired with FLP funds, but they are just such critical partners in the work that we are doing. They can hold land and interest in land for donated tracts, so match parcels for the program. Our NGOs are often the point of contact with the landowner, really helping to initiate those relationships and help design these projects in the very early stages. And then they often play a really important role in facilitating project development, helping with due diligence, surveys, and appraisals, and in some cases, even supporting the states post-closing with some help on monitoring. And then, as I mentioned before, none of this would be possible without, I'm going to keep using the word very patient landowners because it is a process, and we are so appreciative of their willingness to participate in and for conservation easements in helping to manage these lands sustainably into the future. Next slide. So regardless of whether a project is a conservation easement or a fee parcel, or whether funding is coming through our kind of traditional annual LWCF funding or our IRA funding, our Forest Legacy projects are selected through a competitive process. And the process is generally the same for all of our funding. The Forest Service will issue a call for projects. After that, states solicit projects from their landowners and NGOs. And so as land trusts, it's really important that you are in contact with folks at your state agency. So find out who is the lead state government agency for your state Forest Legacy program. You can have a conversation with them to help determine whether your project is in one of those designated green Forest Legacy areas, and if it meets your state's project selection criteria. So each state has their own set of criteria, their own areas, and then their own forest legacy application requirements and deadlines. So we're laying out kind of the national process, but it's really important that you make that connection with your state coordinators. And I've put a link on the slide there of where you can find a list of the coordinators for all of our states. So states, their forest stewardship committees help evaluate proposals. And then project is entered into our National Forest Legacy Information System. It goes through a regional peer review process where peers provide feedback on the applications to help strengthen them for the final submission. Then final submission proposals are submitted to our Forest Service regions and then finally to the Washington office. And we convene a national panel to review and rank projects annually. And that national panel is made up of 12 members of our Forest Service, 6 representatives from federal staff, and then 6 representatives from our state programs as well. So it's a nice mix of our program community that's evaluating projects. So aside from kind of this general application process, there are important differences between our traditional annual LWCF funding and our new IRA funding. And so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Cassie to tell you more about our open IRA funding opportunity.
Thanks, Liz. I think that we have gotten to what I think is our final poll question as I kind of transition with Liz here for a conversation around the Inflation Reduction Act. Caleb, can you drop our third and final question for folks up on the screen? Curious, as we start talking more specifically about forest legacy, what the room is looking like as far as forest legacy project development experience here. And I'll give it just one more second, but it's looking like about 65% of you or so are familiar with the forest legacy project development process. And so likely a lot of the words I'm going to use are familiar to you. And it's good to have that context as we jump into this next section of the conversation. Andy, thanks for getting my slide queued up for me. So I'll just quickly do an overview of the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the language in there. The first thing that I'll note is that we found out, and we're starting to dig into this process in August, just a little over a year ago of 2022. I think when we give presentations like this, we've noted that, Claire, you were on some sort of very exciting and exotic vacation somewhere when this happened. Good things tend to happen when Claire's on vacation, so we encourage her to go on vacation often. So through the Inflation Reduction Act, state and private forestry, conservation programs, appropriation language down there, around $700 million was provided to the Forest Legacy Program. And as you can see, the language there is fairly vague. It's not specific on that targeting a specific type of program or specific interests. Generally speaking, it was $700 million to kind of go do more forest legacy. And so what we did was develop a few projects. Andy, I'm going to bump over to my next slide here. We developed a few project types that help us really get at some investments that historically we haven't seen as widely represented among our LWCF forest legacy projects that we wanted to really focus in on and think about with this wonderful opportunity for investment. And so just as an overview of the way that we kind of outlined the IRA forest legacy opportunity, there's 3 specific project types: the large landscape projects, state and tribal partnership projects, and then strategic small tract projects. And together you can see that there's kind of a limitation that a state could submit in each one of these categories, and then a dollar limit within each of those categories as well. I'll speak a little bit more to each specific category and some special emphasis criteria that applicants would need to address in order to be successful in that application in just a moment. But just to kind of round out a general overview of our IRA scoring guidance, successful projects are going to address special emphasis criteria that are specific to that project type, but then they're also going to address our traditional national core criteria, which you can see highlighted over there on the right-hand side of the slides. For those of you that are familiar with Forest Legacy projects and have completed the application process in the past, this importance, threatened, and strategic, those categories are probably going to seem very familiar to you. Our applicants usually discuss those kind of in character limited bullet points in our application portal for that to be reviewed by the National Review Panel. And then the last thing I want to note on the IRA scoring guidance, and an opportunity that we have through IRA that's kind of unique to this process, is the opportunity for cost share reduction or waiver. So traditionally, Forest Legacy requires a non-federal cost share to equal at least 25% of the total project cost. And for IRA-funded projects, that cost share may be reduced or waived for projects that take place in and deliver substantial benefits to disadvantaged and/or tribal and indigenous communities. That reduction or waiver opportunity is going to be only considered for projects applying under the strategic small tract and state and tribal partnership categories. So the large landscape projects are excluded from this cost share waiver or reduction opportunity. And I just want to note that those are going to be limited and made on a project by project basis by the National Review Panel for approval by the Secretary. Our scoring guidance outlines, I believe, a 4-step process to do that, but just as a quick overview for you all, the indication would need to be made in our project application portal, FLIS, for those of you that have had the joy of working in FLIS before. And you're going to need to be able to describe that waiver or describe the need for waiver or reduction and the benefits to be delivered to the community in question in a letter that the state will deliver to the region. There's a couple of other additional components, as well as the encouraged use of the climate and economic justice screening tool or other government sponsored data tools to support that, that narrative. But just want to make you aware that all of that is outlined pretty thoroughly in our scoring guidance. So now I'm going to bump over and speak a little more directly to each of these 3 project types. And thank you, Andy. The first one I'm going to tackle here is the large landscape projects. I realize this is a lot of information for one slide, so I'm going to do my best to not kind of read this off to you. You can see that there's 6 really core pieces of special emphasis criteria that we wanted to highlight through our large landscape project opportunity. I want to note for you that, as it said on the previous slide, this is a maximum of 1 project that can be submitted in this category per state, with a limit of a $50 million award through this project type. Both conservation easements and fee simple acquisitions are eligible under this opportunity. And then one question that we've fielded multiple times kind of throughout our engagement process was whether or not these projects could span multiple states. And in the scoring guidance, we outline that the project can span multiple states, but in that instance, the states would need to submit separate proposals for their respective portions of the large project. And then kind of on the back end, we will evaluate and join those proposals together as a single project. And then the ask isn't going to exceed that $50 million cap per state in a single round of funding. And then also want to highlight that this is the one project type that cost share waiver or reduction is not available for. I'll kind of pause right there and take a quick breath as we transition to our next project in category type, which is state and tribal partnership projects. So for this next project type, this is again a maximum of 1 project that can be submitted in this category per state per round, again with a limit of $50 million per project. This opportunity is one that's only open to fee simple acquisitions. And then I also want to note that this is an opportunity that cost share waiver or reduction is available for. And we're hopeful that applicants will consider that opportunity when they're considering the suite of categories that are available here. I do want to note that in this project type, there is this kind of unique relationship that we recognize is going to have to take place between the state and the tribe in order to work together to manage the land under this project type, and that understanding that that is going to be a very unique relationship, that co-management piece down there, and the ability to kind of identify what that co-management will look like and what that relationship will look like in some sort of document early on, that agreement to kind of be memorialized in some sort of document with some sort of clarity is a really kind of critical piece of this project type. So I just want to draw your attention to that partnership aspect here and that idea of co-management that's sort of woven through this project type. And then last but certainly not least, I'll kind of overview our strategic small tract projects. And this category is slightly different in that a maximum of 3 projects may be submitted under this category. And then the funding cap on this one is $1.5 million. And I believe that we kind of arrived at this number as a direct result of some of our earlier listening and engagement sessions that we had with hopefully some of you all in this very room who let us know that the original funding cap I think we were considering maybe wasn't feasible for some of the project opportunities that you thought were out there. So we have adjusted that a little bit. And then you'll also note that we kind of adapted the way that we're viewing the public access requirement here, again, as a direct result of some of the engagement sessions that we had with you all. So if you heard us chat about IRA and the way we were thinking of shaping up these projects previously, just note that that's a little bit different in the scoring guidance from what we originally proposed. Just want to draw your attention to that. So for strategic small tract projects, I also want to note that each tract will need to be submitted as a standalone project, not bundled together with other tracts, as we typically allow under our Land and Water Conservation Fund project process. And then for the purposes of this opportunity, a tract is defined as contiguous land under the same legal ownership. And both conservation easements and fee simple acquisitions are eligible for this funding opportunity. And then one of the last things I want to note here is that the emphasis is going to be on projects with non-industrial family and individual forest owners, but strategic tracts that are held by corporate entities may be considered as part of this process as well. We're just really honing in and trying to focus in on those non-industrial family and individual forest ownerships here. And then finally, the last thing I'll note is that cost share waiver and reduction is available, again, on a case-by-case basis for this funding opportunity as well. And I'm going to kind of pause, take a breath there. And as I transition into what I think is my last slide, which is a table of some key dates for you all to consider, I'll also note that as we've gone through this IRA process, those slides that I just shared with you, some of that information, it's a lot to pull out of the scoring guidance itself. So we did create what was collectively supposed to be a 1-pager, but bled over into a 2-pager for IRA and these 3 project types that we will bundle up with the slides and all the other information from this session and be sure to share with you all. We just haven't gotten it quite posted on our publicly available website yet, so we'll make sure that you get that resource. And then I do want to highlight that another kind of tool that we've created in thinking about this is this table of deadlines. It's been a journey to keep track of both the LWCF Forest Legacy deadlines and then also 2 distinct rounds of IRA deadlines. So I generally created this table to help me keep track of some of it, but as I shared out this information, I think the table became helpful for others as well. So if you're a visual person like me, this is something that I've been using to keep track of the associated deadlines. I do want to note that one thing that isn't accounted for on this document that's also really important and critical is that regions often have regional specific deadlines for some of these things. So like, for example, if the round 1 IRA Forest Legacy project proposals are due on December 1st from state lead agencies to the region, often regions have much earlier deadlines, perhaps a month to 6 weeks in advance for them to review, provide feedback on those projects, and kind of enhance those projects before they're officially due on that December 1st date. So it's really critical that partners connect with their regional representative, as Liz noted a few slides ago, around what those deadlines look like and are on track to submit for the given round. And I believe, Andy, that rounds out my IRA slides, and I pass it over to you for some additional funding opportunities.
Awesome. Thanks, Cassie. Let me get us to the right slide. So the next couple of slides, we just wanted to share with you all some other Forest Service landowner assistance programs that currently have funding opportunities available. And the next couple of slides have a lot of links, and we will make sure to share those with all of you. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of 3 programs with current funding opportunities. And the first one, which you all may be familiar with, is the Community Forest and Open Space Conservation Program, which is a unique opportunity for communities to acquire and conserve forests that provide public access and recreational opportunities, protect vital water supplies and wildlife habitat, and serve as demonstration sites for private landowners and provide economic benefits from timber and non-timber products. And the request for applications for fiscal year F24 is now available. The applications are due to state foresters or equivalent tribal officials by January 12th, 2024. And applications are encouraged from across the country. And if you're interested in applying, you should contact your CFP regional contact. And more complete information on the program application process, you can see the final rule. And we have an upcoming informational webinar, which will be October 11th, and registration will be available soon for that. So our next program that we wanted to highlight is the Landscape Scale Restoration Program, which is a competitive grant program that promotes collaborative science-based restoration of priority forest landscapes through which furthers priorities identified in state forest action plans. And these projects cross multiple jurisdictions, including tribal, state, and local government and private forest land, to address large-scale issues such as wildfire risk reduction, watershed protection and restoration, and the spread of invasive species and insect infestation and disease. And the Landscape Scale Restoration Grant Program fiscal year 2024 request for proposals for federally recognized tribes and Alaska Native corporations and villages is now available on grants.gov. And this is for proposals that will be submitted by tribes and Alaska Native corporations and villages. And for this program as well, we have an upcoming webinar that will provide more information about this funding opportunity on September 28th, 2023 at 1 p.m. Oh, that is today. So that will be recorded and we'll share that out. And the final program that we wanted to highlight today is our Forest Landowner Support Program. The Inflation Reduction Act, this is Inflation Reduction Act programming that provides financial assistance grants for projects that support underserved and small acreage forest landowner participation in emerging private forest markets for climate mitigation and forest resilience. And this first notice of funding solicits proposals to access funding from 2 Inflation Reduction Act provisions to support the participation of underserved forest landowners in emerging private markets for climate mitigation or forest resilience, and support for the participation of forest landowners who own less than 2,500 acres of forest land in emerging private markets for climate mitigation or forest resilience. And for this program, proposals are expected from a diversity of applicants, including tribes and tribal organizations, national, regional, local, and community-based organizations, as well as nonprofits and for-profit entities and state and local governments. Organizations representing underserved landowners and first-time applicants for federal funds are also encouraged to apply. And for more information, we also have a website, a link to the website, which we will share. So yeah, those are some of our other programs that currently have funding available. And now I think I'm going to hand it off to Liz to round us off.
Thanks, Andy. So we'll get to questions in just a minute, but Andy's got a screen up with some QR codes. We've tried to put some links to some of the resources in the chat. We'll definitely follow up with folks at the LWCF Coalition to make sure we send all of these resources out to you. But a few QR codes to our Forest Legacy Program website, interactive maps. You can get a sense of the projects in your neck of the woods that have Forest Legacy funding, our call for FY24 IRA projects, and then a link to office hours, open office hours sessions that Cassie will be hosting in October, with our first session scheduled for October 11th. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Caleb, I think, for some questions and answers.
Hi all, yeah, we will now move over to some questions related to the Forest Legacy IRA FY24 proposals. I'm just going to pull everyone else onto the screen. And I see that some people already put some questions in the chat, which Claire was kind enough to answer, but I think we might just revisit a few of those to make sure everyone can hear the answers. Start off first with, can bargain sales be used as match?
Yes, and I answered that quickly to say yes, and that is actually a common source of match, a negotiated lower purchase price with a landowner. But I do want to clarify that what qualifies as match is dependent on the federal appraisal as reviewed and approved by a qualified review appraiser. So sometime I want to highlight that because that is what we do pay close attention to when and a state does when determining what is match.
Thanks, Claire.
Anything to, yeah. And generally match is non-federal, but there are a few federal sources out there. The REPI program managed by the Department of Defense is an example of where we can use that as match as well. But otherwise it's generally not, or it's non-federal is the rule.
Sounds good, thanks. I think there was a question on if state tribal partnerships were fee only, and you answered that as yes. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but if not, we can move on.
Scott, do you want to elaborate on why we chose that at least in this first year, to go with fee only?
Yeah, well, this is an opportunity that, of this co-management being explored, and easements, of course, are sort of, well, they're negative covenants on land, right? They're about how you're going to do things if you do them. And this is an opportunity we're looking for, more active engagement between a state and a tribe. And, that idea of that relationship of working with a landowner, having it a three-party relationship, that doesn't really actually give the tribe actually as much of a role, and actually complicates things because, it's ultimately you have one legal sort of holder and enforcer of an easement, so people asked about that. And, when we've talked about it with people, I think most people have felt that, our decision to focus only on fee there is rational and makes a lot of sense. But, that's kind of was the thinking, was that, the partnership opportunity is there with fee land.
And Caleb, I'll just add, because we've gotten a lot it's not embedded in the question that was right in front of us, but we've heard the question a lot, is first and foremost, our program doesn't allow, through current statute, tribes to be direct holders of land. And so I just want to put that out there. And what we've really putting out as a challenge grant to states to work with tribes in a meaningful and long-term relationship, that it does not work for tribes in specific areas that they're wanting to bring back into tribal ownership or into trust, but does provide an opportunity for areas where tribes would like to have more certainty of access, where there may be cultural sites of importance, but really trying to provide an avenue for states and tribes to work together to manage for those benefits, whether they're cultural or for things like gathering and hunting, etc. this won't work in every state. We also recognize that there's different relationships status across the country, but really looking to kind of promote a different way of working. And no, we don't have any clear examples because we've never done this before. So this is a new ground that we're trying to tread as a program.
That's good. And I think another question that we had on the tribal partnership program was what factors will be considered when deciding whether match will be waived or reduced?
Go ahead, Scott.
Well, we're really waiving, really looking at, what are the benefits? What are the benefits to the public, and really what we're leaning into there is what that relationship and agreement and partnership, long term with the state. What's really the potential, because our leadership has expressed a willingness to pursue a waiver if we can really significantly demonstrate a real benefit to certainly to tribes, but also when we're looking at other underserved communities. So if we're looking at something that's going to benefit a tribe and is going to benefit communities who have traditionally less access to lands or the benefit of lands, if there's we're gonna, I would say and most of the projects that we've been hearing about that are being developed right now, I would say we're probably going to pursue that waiver, because what we're seeing is the potential for a lot of benefit. But if it's if it's not well spelled out and there's not a lot of clear benefits, and then that wouldn't be pursued. But what we're seeing is things that we are seeing a real partnership, really rethinking how partners like states and tribes can work together. Like Claire said, it's really like, it is in some ways a challenge to say, like, let's figure this out. Like, how are you gonna define what this means? And we use words like, meaningful and long-term, and, but we don't define those. And so we probably will start to, once we start seeing examples. But it's an exciting time because we're seeing some interesting conversations going on.
Sounds good. Thanks, Scott. Claire, did you have anything to add? Or
There will be space in the application to make your case of why a match waiver is being requested for a specific project, which gives you a chance to further elaborate what are those, the connection and the relevance of benefits to disadvantaged communities and indigenous communities. When you're working in the state tribal partnership, you're already in that space. And also we do reference the CGEST data set, and do know that also puts a lot of emphasis on tribal nations and areas of importance for indigenous communities. But we're going to be looking at a number of factors there, and just take advantage of that space if you are requesting a match waiver to make your case for why that is needed and important.
Hey, Claire, can I also just add to, for folks that may or may not be familiar, that those are components under both the strategic and important core criteria as well. So separate from the opportunity for cost share reduction or waiver and whether an applicant is requesting that, there should be space, bullet points, and characters for that to be discussed in multiple places, whether that's to the special emphasis criteria under our IRA or just the core criteria of the Forest Legacy Program. Sorry to jump in.
sounds good. Thanks, Cassie. So here's two similar questions on the strategic small tracts. Are there any acreage limitations on these small tracts? And how small are properties considered in the strategic small tracts?
So each state, when enrolling in our program, and then we require updates on a regular basis, has a what is called an assessment of need for the program, and that's incorporated into the forest action plans. Through that process, which does include public participation, states identify whether they have acreage limits or not as part of the state level application and criteria that's applied. Some states that's a minimum of 5 acres. Other states we will only consider acres tracts of 1,000 acres or more. So please get familiar first with those state level guidelines. For us at the federal level, we do not have an acreage limit. And I do want to separate, there's kind of two pieces in there. We, through traditional Land and Water Conservation Fund, we do a lot of small, multiple tract projects that are then bundled. And many of those are relatively small tracts if you were to look at those, even though they're larger projects. For the small strategic tract opportunity, we're really highlighting funding for a single tract, not bundling multiple tracts, as is done through our normal process. And we're going to be putting far more emphasis on what is the strategic value of that tract. Is it filling a key inholding between surrounded by conserved lands? Is it a key connection? And what is the how does that filling that gap or that connection help further augment or preserve the public benefits being provided in that larger mosaic of conserved land? So we are not, as a panel, going to be looking at, oh, this one was 2 acres versus 10 acres. That may be part of the conversation, but it's been really all about the strategic value of that tract in the landscape that you are working to conserve. So that's where our emphasis is. And it is an opportunity to put forward, it is not just strategic value to previously conserved lands under forest legacy, but other, whether it's other federal land, state land, or conservation easement land, or locally conserved land. We're going to be open to all of that.
Just to jump in here too, I think there was a similar question, which maybe you're answering, but do these land tracts need to be adjacent or within U.S. Forest Service boundaries?
In some landscapes, they will be within national forest boundaries, but no, that is not a requirement. And our program works across all 50, or actually 49 states have enrolled, but also a number of territories as well. And many of those states and territories do not have any national forest land at all. So that is not a requirement for any of our projects. But if you're working on a project adjacent to the national forest or within an inholding, that is a possibility. Do know if you're within the federal proclamation boundary, we will ask for a letter of support from the forest supervisor or the other applicable federal official, just to confirm. We don't want to be conserving lands that otherwise there's an interest in moving into the federal estate. So just know there's an added requirement there. Sorry, Scott, I jumped over you. Anything else to add there?
Yeah. I mean, just for people who don't have a lot of familiarity, when we're talking about strategic, we're looking at strategic initiatives, both, holdings on the land and all, generally speaking in the program, and also strategic aspirations of not just, the Forest Service or the state. We're looking at what nonprofits are up to regionally and, interstate. And, so we're thinking about all those things. And as Claire said, it doesn't have to be like within, the priority of the Forest Service for other purposes, but it does have to be adjacent to or an inholding of conserved land, already conserved land. So, and that's, so the opportunity, it certainly could happen that there is an acre or even a half an acre that's an important inholding within a state forest, for example, that could be funded if the case could be made. Yeah.
Thanks, Scott. All right, we'll move on. So the next question, when evaluating large landscape projects, will the reviewers take into account the size of the state and average parcel size when comparing projects? For example, 4,000 acres is huge for Vermont, even though it may be competing against 100,000 acre projects in Montana or California.
So it's going to be very relative to the place that you're proposing a project to, and we recognize that. And so really, again, it's kind of the same parallels as small strategic. Make your case of why is this tract exceptional? What are the for the landscape that you're working in? How is this a large or a large landscape opportunity within that context? We're putting a lot more, an emphasis on once in a lifetime, like the projects that you never thought were possible, but now we're opening up more funding, and that hopefully will move a few more projects forward in negotiating with landowners. But the short answer is no, we're not going to be saying this one, acres is the first thing we look at. Acres are always part of the conversation, but our panels, every panel that we meet to review and score and rank projects, we're always looking at apples to mangoes as far as size, as well as the type of benefits that are being provided, because we work across so many different types of forest ecosystems and so many different communities that we serve. So define it and explain why you see this as an opportunity of this nature, and keep going back to the scoring guidance that Cassie referenced, and making your case within the special emphasis criteria space that you have. And that's where we put a lot of emphasis on exceptional economic, social, and environmental benefits and high strategic importance in the landscape you're working in. So make that connection for the panel. But you also have additional space throughout the application to further emphasize those points.
Yep. Impact and efficiency. That's what the opportunity is about. And like Claire said, once in a lifetime. So this is like, an additional opportunity. And if it looks an awful lot like what might be done sort of through normal LWCF, it might be best there. But yeah, there certainly is an element of, looking at impacts, relatively speaking.
Sounds good. All right, so a brief question on appraisals. Do appraisals need to comply with Yellow Book standards?
Yes.
All right.
With an exception. Yeah, with an exception. If it's a full donation of an interest in of land, like if a nonprofit was going to hold a cost share property, and the full interest was donated to the land trust, we can use the use PAP for that purpose. But it's a narrow circumstance, and you want to basically discuss that with your regional program manager.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Moving on, what is Forest Legacy current policy on tracks with existing carbon projects, and how would that affect prioritization, if at all?
Yeah, our guidelines for quite a long time now have discussed a bit about this. Depending on the nature of the contract, it can have an impact on the degree of threat. Because there's an agreement that could impact other uses of the property. It doesn't mean that it won't be, that a project would not be considered. But relatively speaking, along that continuum of high threat of development to possible development, it would potentially fall lower along that continuum. And then the other reality, and it's tough to go too far into this without particulars, but the other potential issue is what's the impact of the agreement on the appraisal? Is sort of that's not about eligibility. That's just the reality that'll be sorted out, and could have an impact on the appraised value.
Sounds good. Thanks, Scott. And here's a question that I think probably a lot of people have been thinking about with a possible impending government shutdown. What might the impacts be on the Forest Legacy program, and might dates, requirements, or submittals change if the government does shut down?
We predicted that question. It's definitely on our minds as federal employees, and we did get official notice today to begin preparations, but we have not been officially notified that we will be put on furlough yet. We will do our best to maintain the timeline that we have. It is highly disruptive to try to come up with a different timeline to be able to move as many different opportunities forward. And we really do not have any intention of canceling an opportunity, because we know so many of you are working really hard to meet these deadlines and to get your projects considered for funding. we have, so the scoring guidance, the rules that are on our website, we would expect that our website will stay live, but there won't be support. So please take a moment to download that information. Also, know that the state coordinators will be still working, so use them as your first set of resources and sounding board. They should be your first point of contact anyway. Our Forest Legacy Information System, I was discussing with the administrator as we were just now, and he says as far as he knows, the system will stay live. Again, no support, so if something goes wrong, that system may go down. Cassie, I believe we're going to send out, a summary of what are the character limits and the bullets for each of the categories. We'll send that through Caleb. So if the system goes down, you can keep working on an offline version. I would encourage you to have an offline version just in case the system goes down, but do know the system should be alive, well, and able to enter data if you have permission to do that. And just one note for our Forest Legacy Information System, the state coordinators, some states choose to enter that information themselves, and you all share that with them. Others will assign roles and direct access to different NGO partners that are working on a project. The ability for us to assign new roles or the states to request new roles, that will be shut down. So if you have access to the system now, good. Otherwise, you're going to need to work through your state coordinator to get the information uploaded. So again, offline versions may be the best. Once we are back, we will be available as always for additional, coaching, information, questions, etc. We don't know when we would be back. We don't know if this will happen. So recognize that may cause, it causes all of us a little bit of consternation because it's stepping into the unknown. But do know that as soon as we are allowed to work again, we would be, our whole team, national and regional, will be available to help field questions and work through the challenges. We are planning to stay on track for our LWCF panel, which is to meet in the end of November. We've got those applications in hand and a panel that we will be kicking off tomorrow, just so that we limit how much time we might lose. And our first IRA deadline is in early December. And so it's not with, the longest shutdown that I believe has happened so far is 35 days. And so even if, and certainly hope that there wouldn't be anything longer than that. So we're planning to stay on track for that December deadline. Do know if you're not feeling ready for the December deadline, whether or not there's, the shutdown happens, there's a May opportunity as well. And we're going to be very intentional of not, that it's not that you need to be in round one to get a higher chance. If you're not ready for round one, please come in for round two. And that, and if we get fewer applications because of the shutdown for round one, and we will be rolling those funds and also being kind of a very strong eye to the quality of the project proposals, and may end up funding more in round two. But again, I'm highlighting a lot of speculation, but I wanted to give some tangible, download the directions and download an offline copy from FLIS, or look at the character limits that Cassie's going to send out, and stay the course and coordinate with your state coordinator while we are not allowed to be working, if this happens on next week.
Well covered, Claire. The only piece of information I would add is, as you said, this, with this first IRA round in this these two rounds, those project limits that were talked about earlier of one large, one tribal co-management and 3 small, those limits are for each round. So those states can come in in December and that second round in the spring. And so, as Claire said, we've got a lot of practice at being adaptable, but hopefully we're not gonna have to work those muscles too hard, because it won't be very long if that happens. That's what we're hoping.
Well, knock on wood, we avoid that altogether, but glad you guys are planning for it just in case. So next question, if an application was submitted for FY24 LWCF funding, is a separate application necessary for IRA funding?
So you're allowed to take your your LWCF proposal and then submit it for IRA. Do pay attention to, we are really featuring some different, what we see as likely different opportunities that would come forward in IRA versus LWCF. But we do know that there are a few projects that kind of bridge, within the where that could be fit in either category, or work in either funding opportunity. To answer the question more directly, LWCF applications have the 3 core criteria that Cassie mentioned, and some additional information. But that information you can carry over to your IRA, but then you still add the information specific to the special emphasis criteria. So you won't have to repeat the work. You can take your LWCF application and then update it. There literally will be a toggle in FLIS that says, this was the LWCF application, now I want it to be an IRA application, and more fields will pop up. So you will have more work to do. Our system will catalog what you or archive what you submitted into LWCF. So you can go literally edit and update the same information and switch it over IRA and know that your original application won't be lost in the system. So maybe I'm getting into more details, but you can't submit exactly the same thing because there's more information needed, but you won't have to re-enter in all of that information into FLIS. Anything to add on that, Cassie, that you're more versant in these FLIS details? And FLIS, by the way, is the Forest Legacy Information System, the database that we use at the federal level to accept proposals.
The only thing I could think to note, Claire, that is on the FLIS overview of changes as it relates to IRA would be that in addition to there being additional space to address that special emphasis criteria, for a couple of projects, there's the opportunity to upload an additional map. And most applicants are usually very excited about the opportunity to have additional map space. So it's likely you'll want to take advantage of that opportunity for the large landscape and state and tribal partnership projects. And then I would just note that you're again going to have to go through that process of technically submitting the project to the region, and the region again has to submit the project to the Washington office. So that whole kind of continuum will need to occur as well.
Thanks, Cassie. And a quick question here. So how much funding is expected to be given out in round 1 for the IRA?
So we have up to $250 million for projects submitted in the next year, both through round 1 and round 2. We will be roughly looking at 125 and 125, but we're not, we're really going to be responsive to and asking each panel to be very thoughtful about what is the level of the number and the nature of the applications that come in. We are not going to spend all of that 250 million in round 1. You are not, and it's much more of a, should we maybe be considering something lower than 125 in round 1, depending on the number of applications. But we've got a lot of unknowns here, so let's just for simplicity say we're planning to be evaluating projects up to 125 in each round million, maintaining some flexibility in there so that we can be responsive to the number and type of applications we get.
And just to let everyone know, it looks like we're winding down the questions, but if anyone has any additional questions, please do put them in the chat and Q&A. Here's another question. So how does the annual appropriations process affect or not affect the allocation of IRA FLP funds?
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah. Oh no, I was going to say, Claire, go for it, but I'm happy to. So it's a great question, and I think everybody knows, the we've had our 24 projects in hand, and have ranked those, we're going on close to a year now, right? And we, and of course that's not resolved because we're going into the budget, and we've got all our FY25 LWCF projects in hand now, and we're going to wait, and then we have who knows how long for those. So it's a really great question. And so theoretically, we can think of the money as that we have control over it, that like it's in hand. Like, so Claire, like as Claire said, we're we may spend as much as 250 in these rounds, but it could be less depending on the quality of projects. But no, when we receive these projects, and then those panel dates that Claire shared with you, or that were shared with you earlier, that Cassie showed, then that panel will make a recommendation of the projects to be funded, and of course the waivers to be applied, and we'll make that to our leadership, and it will go through the the Forest Service and the department for approval. And then we'll be able to move forward and issue those grants. It does not need official congressional blessing in the same way that the appropriations and allocations of LWCF do. But before these are issued, we will be sending those to the Hill. And we will be sharing those with Congress before anyone is notified of anything. We'll be sharing those with the Hill as part of our approval and clearance process before any awards are made. So it will be relatively quick. I mean, that's one of the things that's very attractive. Is that those awards will be in hand. There's also some corresponding expectations because those are of a high degree of readiness of these projects through IRA, and bringing them to closure with a pace that because the monies are available, they should be able to move quickly. We should be able to move quickly to successful closing. Claire, did you have something you wanted to add?
So we did a test trial of this with our first round of IRA funding that I think we haven't mentioned yet. We did deliver and make an announcement in June for the first 100 million. The panel that met to consider those applications, and we considered applications that had been already submitted for FY23, knowing we had a really deep bench of opportunity. So our panel met in early March, and we then went through the clearance process and the congressional notification process that Scott just mentioned, and we were able to announce those at the end of June. So there's our trial balloon of 3.5 months from the panel meeting to final announcement, and then it took on average another month before those projects were fully obligated to grants at the regional level. So it's much faster than our normal process. And that's one reason we're putting a lot more emphasis on readiness. We always put emphasis on readiness, but in particularly, we're putting a lot of emphasis here because we're going to be able to move the money faster, and we're asking applicants to be ready to move fast as well on your end, especially for the small strategic tracks. That one has the tightest expectation that once the grant is awarded, so let's say that's 4 months after our panels meet, that then the clock would start for completing that within a year. So be really putting a lot of thought into the readiness. And this year is not our last year of opportunity for IRA funding opportunities. This is just the first year. We do intend and have put forward a schedule to our leadership to deliver similar opportunities through 2027. So if you need a little bit more time to work on readiness, take the time that you need so that you can put forward a ready project.
Thanks, Claire. So we have a few more questions in the chat now. Is project value affected by using land match versus cash match? Can you walk us through how the relevant calculations are made, particularly when you're working with a private timber landowner who is looking to realize full market value for a fee purchase?
So there may be some specifics in there that it would be better to kind of work through your case in hand, but I'll take a stab at it and then I'll turn to Scott because he's more versant in the world of appraisals evaluation than me. So as I mentioned before, when we go to determine what is the amount of money that we can put into a transaction and what would qualify as match, we use it. We must have a yellow book, an appraisal that meets yellow book standards, and we require that to be, you know, a qualified appraisal that does the work, and then it's reviewed by a qualified yellow book appraisal. Much of the time that is a federal review appraiser, but not all the time. And it's that yellow book determination of value that meets the yellow book standards that we then use to say, okay, the Forest Legacy program can contribute up to 75% of that value, and then it's up to the state and the partners that are working with on that project partners to determine how you're going to fill that other 25% of the official cost share. So that can be landowner donations, it can be state funding, it can be as I mentioned, some of their other federal programs can qualify when for non-federal match. But it's that appraised value that is really the starting point to the math that I think you're referring to.
Yeah, I'm hearing that question a little differently, Claire, and maybe the questioner can put in a question, because for like our large projects and potential partnership, co-management projects, we have a potentially very large cap, right? And we have what I'm hearing in that question is, is like in the small strategic projects, is the 1.5 the project value or the potential grant? If you had a grantee who, if you had a project that was $3 million, what I think they're asking is, and that was going to be, dollar per dollar match, could they apply for a $1.5 million grant? Where is that cap? And the person who asked that question, if you could just sort of add on, make sure we're answering your question. So that's kind of how I was hearing the question.
Thanks, Scott and Claire. I just Jane Kiger here from Washington Nature Conservancy, and I've heard it described in various places, and I've just been very confused, and it could just be me, that where you're using, if you're using cash match, you actually calculate that 25% differently than if you're using a donated land match. And so, I mean, it could be poor guidance, but it's been a point of confusion for me, and it's even on large projects. So I'm happy to follow up separately and provide more details, but I don't want to take away from this meeting. So I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe.
Can I
we have a discussion in the guidelines. Yeah, yes, please, Liz. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I'm if you have a property that's worth $1 million, you're not limited to getting $750,000 from Forest Legacy. Like, you could get the full $1 million value of that tract if you had a parcel to match it with. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's
okay.
Part of what you're asking as well.
I think that's exactly the point. Yeah, I think that's the point.
Yes.
Is if we state the project value as higher, we can find a donated piece of land that's totally eligible, but then the property owner can still realize full value if necessary.
Right.
Possibly,
and yeah, and that is a strategy that is commonly used for our LWCF. And I do want to put in a little bit of, and I think we're definitely open to it for the small strategic tracts, if you're going to have a donated tract. But for the large landscape projects, the opportunity we're putting forward with IRA really is meant to be put you all in a strong negotiating stance with the landowners, so that the landowners are, so that they are providing a high leverage or high donation value as well. So to try to do land. And Scott, I don't know that we've fully like settled on a position on that, but I would say for the large landscapes, I'm not, it's not that land matches off the table, but it's not meant to be that we're trying to get, higher leverage from some of our larger land owners that we work with.
Yeah, no, I don't, we haven't said it can't be matched with land, and there's a lot of situations. But so when we had these three categories, these three additional categories, these, we didn't pull these out of whole cloth. These are like, I think like Cass, like Liz and Cassie had talked about, these were sort of ideas in talking with our partners, our state partners and our nonprofit partners over the years. Like, wouldn't it be nice if these, are things we could do? And we knew of some projects that were being worked on and conversations even with some landowners where, if you could bring X dollars to the table at one time, what they would be willing to do above and beyond what they were required to do. And so we actually had some landowners who were, if you could bring 40 million in, they're, like, we would be willing to cost share X. And so that sort of informed how we developed these categories, and that's one of the things we're thinking of in high impact. It's high impact of the lands, but it's high impact of the dollars relative to the, those public benefits that's being secured by those easements or fee acquisitions. But, as you said, Claire, it doesn't have to be a bargain sale. It could be additional lands. Yeah.
All right. We have a few other questions related to value. So if there are other elements that can enhance the fair market value, such as mineral and timber rights, are they added to the land value to become the highest and best use value?
This is like, I feel like this question, like I've been prepared for this question by appraisers. So, market value is the market, is defined, like there's a legal definition of what market value is, right? And it's what a reasonably informed buyer with a, reasonable exposure time is going to pay for the land, with cash or cash equivalent, right? So the idea of like that there's different values in the land that are added up. There's something in appraisals that are called it's called the unit rule. And what it essentially is like the fair market value is not the composition of those individual pieces of value added together. It's what what someone's going to pay on the market for title to the interest as it stands.
Okay, and another question on value. How is FLP project selection affected in cases where very high value conservation parcels necessarily include sometimes quite pricey structures with little or no conservation value?
Yeah, it starts to get that idea of the contributory value of structures. This could take us down a really a real, I wouldn't even say a rabbit hole. It's a whole rabbit warren. But if you have a structure that exists, on a, like say on a 1,000-acre ranch, and it's going to exist in the before and it's going to exist in the after, there's it's not the conservation of those acres under that property you're going to pay for, necessarily. But there is the question that comes up too of, how do we look at, the relative value, conservation value of pieces of land? And it's, why not go where the land is cheapest, right? There's like people who, sometimes ask that, right? And it's, there's not like a formula that we've developed, but, we're looking at what the importance is and what the impact is of the investment. And, we have been willing to invest, I'm trying to remember what eight-figure in you know, in parcels that are only a few hundred acres because of the importance of those lands and the impacts they make on the landscape. So, you know, again, if it looks like, you know, if the program needs to spend quite a bit of money on something that has a high fair market value because it has a really high conservation importance and a high value of strategic importance, then the program will be willing to do that. It's really hard, you know, there's not like a, you know, we're going to toss something out just because it's expensive. We don't, you know, that's not how we consider projects. But, you know, I'm not going to be able to, you know, you know, a very specific case could confuse this conversation further or provide more clarity, but I'm not sure, you know, which of those it might do. But, you know, it's, you know, we're going to consider what the impact is and, you know, and what the price is and what those conservation values are. And if they're compelling, you know, the program may be willing to fund the project.
Sounds good. Thanks, Scott. And I know we're supposed to end at 3:30, but I think we have a few more questions, so we're going to try to answer all the questions that we have. Is there a preferred form of conservation easement?
We don't have a template, if that's what the question is getting to. Some states may have a preferred form, and that so make sure you're asking that question at the state level. Our guidelines, which are available on our website, provide a set of required language that we require in easements, as well as required provisions, and really is a checklist of the things that we're looking for before we will fund a project that has a conservation easement. At the application stage, you do not have to have a fully drafted easement, although you get more readiness points if you are further down that trajectory. We do a full review and approval of an easement before we do send the final funding. So some of those details can be worked out later, but do look at the guidelines and our required conservation easement language and provisions as the roadmap for what we're looking for.
I think Liz just put those guidelines in the chat, so if anyone's curious, take a look there. So question here, my cooperative is raising sheep and goats for brush mitigation and are currently working within our community to reduce brush locally near Yosemite. We're looking to grow our herd and expand our efforts. We are curious if this type of work would qualify for the small strategic tracts.
So what's not clear in that question is whether the work would be, I mean, we fund either a state acquisition of land or another unit of state government acquiring land or the establishment of a conservation easement. So that there would need to be a strategic tract that would be related to that kind of collaborative effort. Could that tract or, you know, be managed for the brush management? Likely, but we can't be paying, you know, when our funding source wouldn't be paying for the actual herd development that I think was we did in that question. So, but I also do want to note, you know, depending on the landscape you're working, you do have to meet a forest cover as part of the eligibility requirements, 75% forest cover. So some of our, you know, more grazing focused projects are not eligible for that reason, but that doesn't mean it's not. I just wanted to highlight that as if that wasn't captured earlier.
Yeah, and the one thing I would say, it's, you know, I would look at the landscape support applications that, you know, Cassie shared with us, you know, some additional opportunities. Those are generally, you know, I think are really meant to be about, those NLS are meant to be like about actual treatments on land. But, you know, I hesitate to say that if something like this wouldn't fit. I would go and look at those more closely and maybe contact, you know, your regional contact for that, you know, but I think otherwise, I think your answer is right, Claire. We're, it's not about the treatments on the land for us, or, our authorities are about the acquisition.
And I think our last question is, each IRA special emphasis criteria required for eligibility, or are they criteria for ranking purposes?
They're not required. You're going to fare better if you address each one of them and that you make a strong case in each one of them. But we would definitely anticipate some applications will put more time and attention into one or two of the special emphasis criteria, but than maybe others. But there's a balancing act there. But try to address all of the ones listed, at least in some degree in the special emphasis area that you have in the Forest Legacy Information System. Do also note that our scoring guidance does provide a list of project requirements, eligibility requirements that all projects must meet. Those are summarized at the front end of our guidance. So please take a look at that to answer the eligibility questions. And then for everything that is in our, whether it's special emphasis criteria, important, strategic, or threatened, it's better to address as many of the elements as are applicable to your project. But I'm going to speak to the importance section as a very concrete example. There we have, I think, a dozen criteria that the panel will be considering, but you do not have to answer and address all of them. Some applications do, but others will say, no, this is a watershed and economic economic value project, and put more emphasis there, and maybe there's less attention or really not even on some of the other elements. And I suspect, and the panels always have to balance that. Is this a well-rounded project, but what is the quality versus this is really high quality on a couple attributes, but they're really, really high quality and of high public value. So we're always having to balance a little bit of different levels of information that come forward. But I still advise for the special emphasis criteria, try to address all six, or I think we have six for each one of these, 6 and 5. That
Claire,
are
just a question coming in as you were talking. Will those special emphasis criteria be included in the online application in FLIS?
You'll have space to address them. So they're not like answer this question. It's space to use a set of bullets to address each of the elements that we put in the scoring guidance. And that's why I'm trying to say there's a little bit of decision space you'll have to make as far as, do you put more emphasis on one or two of those criteria and then less on others. But I guess I leave you, that's a balancing act each applicant will have to make. But I do advise that you address all 6 of them, and for small strategic tracks, it's 5, at least in some way.
Mm-hmm.
While we're talking about eligibility and criteria, I just want to put another plug in about the importance of connecting with your state coordinators, because each state is going to have its own application and priorities. And so we're putting out kind of the overarching guidelines, eligibility criteria. But please make sure that you are developing that partnership and relationship and making sure that you understand what each state's requirements are. And I will put that link to the state coordinators in the chat again.
And one final, sorry, Cassie, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add one kind of hopefully quick note, Caleb, and that's that when you read through the scoring guidance for both LWCF kind of traditional projects and then the IRA projects, you're going to note that there's a place where we talk about scoring, and we detail what a high, medium, and low scoring project would look like. And then you'll note at the very end of that, I'm actually dropping the IRA scoring guidance in the chat right now. And for this guidance, it starts on page 16. We'll note some additional considerations, and that's where we get into some details that say something like, once we've considered how the project scores, here are some reasons we may reconsider the way a project ranks when the panel meets. And so I know that the question was around ranking. I just want to make sure that there's a little bit of clarity there. We consider things like the national core criteria, importance, threatened, strategic, and those special emphasis criteria when panelists individually are considering what their score will be for a particular project. And then process-wise, Andy and myself kind of collect all of those scores. We go through a process of normalizing scores, and then when the panel meets all together, you'll see that those additional considerations are things that they consider collectively that may reorder that rank for some way, shape, or form. And I hope that provided clarity and not confusion, but I just wanted to add that in.
Thanks, Cassie. And as we were speaking, one more question came in. I think hopefully we can answer quickly, but does the Yellow Book appraisal, is that required for application, or can that be done after award?
After award, we require a market analysis to inform the value, the requested value, or the requested amount of funding. And a market analysis can include an appraisal as part of one of your data points, but we actually encourage you to have a couple different data points. And then the Yellow Book appraisal is done after award and after all of the due diligence is done for that project, including finalizing that the conservation easement if it's an easement project.
Mm-hmm.
Don't run out and get a Yellow Book appraisal. Please don't. It makes it more complicated. But do get a market analysis, and we actually define in our scoring guidance what we mean by a market analysis for our purposes.
Sounds good. Well, I think that wraps up all the questions. Before I hand it over to Leslie to wrap it up, just want to thank everyone for the very thoughtful and insightful questions, and thank the Forest Legacy team for all the great answers. And Claire and Scott, I don't know if you have any final words before we pass it to Leslie to wrap it up, but anything you'd like to share?
Thank you all. We're just very excited to see what applications come forward, and please bear with us over the next few weeks when we may not be as available as we like to be. So please have a little bit of patience and grace as we navigate these next steps. And otherwise, just really appreciate everybody getting on today and for being such strong partners for our program. I think it was Liz who mentioned we don't know of a single project out there that has not had a nonprofit partner involved in some way, and often really spearheading the project from the beginning through all the stages of implementation. So you all are critical to our program, and really appreciate having the opportunity to answer a few questions today. Scott, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And it's exciting to look at this list and look at partners that, that we've worked with in different ways over the years. But, it's also really interesting to see that there's some people who haven't worked with legacy projects and with the states. So, if you haven't built those relationships with your state coordinator, there's a lot of ways to engage. And generally what we've seen is the states are really grateful for what the partners, bring in their understanding locally and what they're trying to achieve and how it complements what they're trying to do. And as was said by several people, it's how the partnership contributes to the, overall to the success, how the nonprofit partners engage is really important.
Great. Well, Mayan, I'll just wrap up and thank you all. This has just been such a great session, fantastic questions. And I just want to thank the Forest Legacy team for being so thoughtful and thorough and always available. So I want to put a little exclamation point on that. They are going to be as available as they can be. That's something that we just can't thank them enough for. We will have all these resources on our website and obviously send the wrap up from all of this and be there for you for whatever you need from our end as well. And we are really looking forward to seeing some great projects in the future. So thanks everybody for joining and for sticking with us for the long session. We appreciate it. And I'm sure we will be back with more as needed. So thanks again.